I'm George Pearson, and these are just a few examples from some of the training videos I have here on YouTube. Now, when you're working with the training, following along the training, if you want to get the materials I used in the training, just go to the description down below and click on the link that's at the top of the description, and this will take you to a page where you can download the materials. Please subscribe, click the like button, and of course always share on Facebook, Twitter, or wherever. I really appreciate that. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the video. In this Photoshop Elements video, we're going to remove these figures here, this figure on the left side and this figure on the right side, and leave just the center figure. You can see how that looks. Let me just go over here and hide this top layer. There we go. That's how it is with those figures removed, and that's how it is with the figures in there. Now, it's a straightforward process, but you do need to think this through as you're doing it. And the most important part is to analyze the picture ahead of time and then do a few tricks. I'll be doing this whole thing with just the clone stamp tool. Right over here, we'll do this real basic, just straight clone stamp tool, nothing else, to do this whole project. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to just dock this in here, and let's zoom out a little bit so we can see what we're doing here. Now I'm going to hide the background here. This is my finish, and we'll be working on this layer here. Now normally when I work on anything like this, I make a copy of the layers. The first thing I ever do. So grab your layer, copy it up here, make a copy of that, and then hide that original. That way you can always go back to that if you happen to mess things up. And we'll be working right here on this layer, so it's easy to mess things up, and you will have to go back potentially and grab that original. So always make a copy of the layer and work on your copy. Now, looking at the picture, it's pretty straightforward. As you can see, there's no overlap between these figures, so we don't have to do any careful masking around the edge of the figure, which is what we would normally do. So let's say this person was behind this person. I'd carefully make a selection along this edge and then work inside that selection, protecting this figure. Now we'll be doing some of that because I want to do that protection down here on the rock. I want to do it along the rock in here on this edge. I want to do it along the edge of the mountains. Whenever you have that kind of an edge in there, you want to protect that to make it easier to do. And also over here. Now the problems are that first we have those edges. That's easy to solve. We have a sky. Sky is at times very tricky to do. This one will work out okay because of the clouds. Clouds will actually help us to do this. But skies can be a problem because it's easy to see clone stamping in a sky situation where there's some real evenness in there. But having the clouds breaks that up, and that should solve it for us. Also, this rock in the background, we need to recreate that rock that's hiding behind her legs. So we'll do a little bit of fakery back in there. All right, we'll start off with this figure, and we'll start working a bit at a time. And I'll zoom in. We'll do just her feet first. Here we go. Now, I want to keep this line in here. I want to keep the line of the rock in here. So I'll do the rock half first. I'll grab my Marquee tool. I like using the polygonal Marquee tool here, polygonal lasso tool. And I'm just going to make a selection and then kind of guess where the rock should be in behind, and then finish my selection over here. All right, now when I'm making this selection, I'm going to be staying right up against the edge of that rock. And then I'm just kind of eyeballing about where that curve should be through here. And we'll bring it out a little bit further. And I'll bring it down like that. Now you either can just double click and Elements will automatically close that shape, or just go back to find your beginning point, and when you get the beginning point, click on that to close that shape. Now this area is selected and I can work on this area. This area out here is protected, and that's what I want. Okay, go to our clone stamp tool. Look at the size, it's far too large. I'll bring that down. Something around here, and I'll be changing the size of this a lot during this video. I always like to work with a real soft brush, one of these soft brushes in here when I'm using the clone stamp, unless I'm working against a hard edge, which case I had to go for a hard edge brush. So soft brush and opacity 100%. Now over here, the aligned means that when I click on an area, And to use the clone stamp, you hold the Alt key down, the cursor changes, click on an area, and let go of the Alt key. Now, notice how that is copying. You can see it in there. It's copying that piece to someplace else, so it's going to allow me to actually paint with that bit. The align bit means as I paint and I move my brush, once I click on my first spot and I move my brush, the initial click point will also move to match. So it kind of keeps it in order, keeps it in sequence. If I didn't have this checked, it would give me a new start from that same initial start point each time I clicked on the mouse. I mean, there's different ways to do that. In most cases, you want to have that aligned. Now the clone overlay down here, this is just what this cursor looks like. You see it right there. It's what that looks like. Right now we see the brush size, we see the clone sample in the middle, and it's kind of fading out, and you see it goes just a little hard to see, but it goes just a little ways past this circle. You can kind of see it as I wiggle it around a little bit. See a little bit better up here. So just a little bit past that circle. Let's look at our clone overlay options. First off, the opacity. If I don't do the overlay, notice there I don't see it any longer. I don't see what I'm copying. So you want to have that selected. The opacity is how solid that looks. If I bring it down to 50%, see it's kind of faded now. Now this isn't changing how the brush tool works. It's just changing the look of this little brush. Clipped, right here. Now this clips the overlay to the current brush. You can see it's about that same brush size. If I uncheck that, notice how it's now not locked in. Just put that back to clipped again. There we go. Auto hide is going to hide that as I'm painting. Invert overlay gives me a negative. You can see right there, there's a negative color. Now, I personally have never had any reason to change any of these settings. And that's what I'd recommend that you do. Just ignore that. It really doesn't make that big of a difference. In most cases, the settings in here are exactly what you want anyway. So this little bit was just for your information. But again, in most cases, you can just ignore the clone overlay bit. But you want to have the align checked and then use a soft brush. Okay, we've already checked or selected our initial position over here. And I'll bring it up here and I'll begin to paint. Notice that little plus sign over there, how that is moving along as I'm moving my brush. Now if I let go and I move my brush over here, notice how that plus sign stayed put. It stayed in place. So it stays in the same relationship to my brush as I'm painting. That's the aligned bit right there. Okay, so that takes care of that part of the boot. Now I want to paint out this part of the boot. And I'm going to be copying parts of this background over this part. Now I also want to keep my alignment exactly the same here on this edge. I want to keep that selection the same. So I'm just going to invert my selection. So I'll go up here to Select, Inverse. There we go. You can see it's inverted if I pull this down to the bottom. And you'll see the marching ants along the bottom edge there. So it's been inverted. And I'm now going to copy from out here and paint over here. Now, when you're doing this, look for lines that you can follow. So there's kind of a line in here. So it's a little bit more green down here, a little less green up here. There's kind of a line along in there. It's more green or less green here, more green down here. Follow those lines if you can. We'll start off by doing a new point. So hold the Alt key down. I'll click right there and lift up. I'll bring it down to here and I'll just paint kind of along that same direction. Now the first thing I want to do is just to get the image covered up. I'm going to be working from both sides, kind of going back and forth in here. So I like to work into the image that I'm getting rid of. You find it tends to make for a better outcome. And again, I'm trying to follow that visual line. Now whenever you clone stamp, it's possible to duplicate things that are obvious. Like there's this bit right there. And right there, it's the same thing. So I'm going to copy from here and just paste over that to hide that. So look for those duplicated areas and cover those up. Okay, continuing on up here. Notice we have kind of this light area in here, and there's more green back there. I'm going to try to pull that, and I'll pull some of this light down here, and I'll clone stamp up along that edge, kind of recreating that same curve. Now I want to grab this greener section and paint in some of the green. I'll go from both sides again. You see that happens, it just means you've got up and you've grabbed a bit of the original figure. Just make a new selection. Each time you see that cursor change, that means that I've held the Alt key down and I'm clicking a new spot. There's one of those duplicates right there, so I'll grab this and just hide the duplicate. There we are. So you can see how I kind of mimicked that curve in there, so it follows that line, and that helps to hide the selection. Okay, right here, notice that we lose our greenery in there, and the hills become much more barren. Keep that in mind as you're doing this. So let's just work in along this edge. Again, I'm going to be working from both sides towards the center and hiding any duplications that I'm seeing. Now I'll grab some of this lighter color up here, and let's come in and paint in a bit of that. And there's a little bit of a line right there. I'm going to grab that, just extend that in a little bit, and I'll hide that duplication. And again, notice right here, again, there's a little line. It's a little bit darker, a little bit more brown here than it is down here. So I want to follow that line along. So I'll grab that and just kind of pull that line in. So wherever you have those lines, that's kind of a visual cue for the eye that something has changed. You want to keep those if at all possible. So it's really a matter of trying to just fool the eye into thinking that everything's okay. And I think it's a little bit rough, a little bit bland here. I'm just going to grab something right there and just stick a little bit of a bush right there. And the edge here is a little soft, so I want to find a little bit of an edge, maybe like right there. Just put a little bit of an edge in here just to break up that edge, that soft edge. Okay, now we have the top of the mountains in here. So same thing, I'll grab from right there, right at that top edge. You can see there's the clone piece. I'll pull it down, I'll try to match up that lined edge and then just work along that edge and recreate that. It looks like it begins to level out here a little bit and then comes down again. Now it's a bit tricky, so we're going to do something a little trickier for that part. First I'm going to get rid of this hand, just get it up a little ways. Now to follow along this edge, let's make a new selection. Let's go over here to our selection tool, make sure you're on new selection, and I'm going to click right along this edge here and then kind of fake where the edge of that mountain should be, and then pull that around and back to the beginning again. Okay, now I have an edge to work against, so I can just come in and clone stamp. Now when you're clone stamping with a selection, you can select outside of the selection. It doesn't matter. Let me just show you that. I'll go way over here and I'll grab from out here and paint in. So the selection protects where you're painting, but it doesn't stop you from grabbing someplace else. Like out here, I can grab from that point right there and come in and paint over in here. Okay, let's finish up the clone stamp here. I'll just grab from right here someplace and do a little bit of that in there. There we go. We're now going to invert this selection again and do the sky bit. Select inverse, grab some sky and pull it in. Now I'm going to have to come back in and do some additional fixing on this sky. But right now I just want to get the basics in and get the figure out of the way. And then we'll improve things after that's been done. So this is kind of a rough bit. Okay, so the figure is now away from that mountain. We have some space to work in, so I now can back out a little bit. When you're working in a sky area, you're going to want to use a larger brush and be further out. As you can kind of see where I was clone stamping in there. So I want to be able to hide that. So let's go back to our clone stamp tool. Check our brush size, way too small. Let me bring that up quite a bit. That's pretty good. Now again, I'm looking for edges. There's an edge of this cloud, so I'll grab the edge of the cloud and I'll match that edge up and then paint in and just quickly get rid of that figure. Okay, I got a little bit over here, so let's just undo. I went too far on that. Be a little more careful this time and make sure I don't get too close to that other figure. There we go. Okay, get rid of the head. That's good. Now to get this little bit of cloud in there, I'm going to find that someplace else. So let's first just get rid of the figure. And I'll put in just some basic stuff like that. Looks good. There's a little bit of a spot right there. I'm going to bring my clone stamp tool down about half the size. And this just right like that. A little bit of a line is showing there. All right, let's now zoom out a bit further and see how the clouds look. They actually look okay. Maybe in here a little cloud in there might be nice. So let's go back to our clone stamp tool. Bring the size up a bit. That's pretty good. I'm going to grab some clouds over from here. And I'm just going to put them in right into there. Just kind of blend those clouds in. Maybe a little bit of cloud down in there. So a little right along the edge. There we go. Let's just deselect for a second. That looks pretty good. It's a little bit off. You can see I kind of overlapped my selection down there at that point, and at this point we can fix that, and then need to soften that edge up. Now this is going to require a hard edge brush. So go back to our brushes, bring the size down, and let me just switch to a hard edge. And I'm going to grab right in there. And let me just get that bit out of the way. And a little bit right in there to hide that overlap. Back to the soft brush. And a little larger. And this just to soften up those edges so that we don't have anything really showing. So you can see it's really a matter of going back and forth a little bit. Now, the last bit here is that we have this hard edge right along in there. The actual skyline is soft, and what we did is a hard edge. So let's go over here to these tools. We have a blur tool, a sharpen tool, and a smudge tool. Grab the blur tool and give yourself a pretty small brush size, about 13 I think on this, and then just kind of paint back and forth over that edge until you blur that out and it matches the amount of blurring in the rest of that edge up here. And I think that looks pretty good. Maybe it's a little soft over here. I'll switch over here to the sharpen tool. And just a little bit of sharpening in there. And that looks like it's a pretty good match now. Okay, first figure is gone. Let's see how we're doing. We'll back out. Looks good. Let's just double check the edge of the rock. Notice how it's a little bit jagged right there. That's that edge of that selection. So we'll do the same trick in here. Go to the blur tool and just drag it right along the edge of that selection just enough so that the blurriness matches everything else. It's a little soft right here and right there. It's almost a visual effect because there's a light area in behind, but I'm just going to go ahead and hit those spots just a couple of times. Let's bring the size down a little bit. Back to our blur tool. And just kind of soften those little spots out. So we're just doing little tricks to deceive the eye as to what we did. When you got to this far, you'll never see that. Okay, so there we go. There's our first person is now gone. We can now work on the second person. Same technique on the second person as on the first person. We'll come in this time, she's in behind the rock, so I don't have to paint into the rock, but I will have to mask off that edge. So again, we're going to make a selection along the top edge of the rock. So back to the polygonal lasso tool, and I'll pull a nice selection right along this edge. I'll be just inside of the edge, just a hair, just a pixel or so inside that edge. And bring it down. And the inside of the shape you're making is what's selected, and that's what is available to paint it. And I'm going to come out here, so I'm not touching the end or the start position. I'll double click, and notice how it just fills in that gap. If you're reasonably close, just double click and it fills it in. Okay, the first thing I care about right now is this edge. So let's take some more greenery in here and we'll fix this edge. We'll do the rock shape as a secondary pass. So let's get rid of the image first. So clone stamp tool, soft brush, bring the size down a little bit because of her size in here, and I'll grab some of this right there, and I'm just going to paint in here, and let's just do a little bit of back and forth work on this and just get rid of those shoes. And remember, don't worry about the rock on the left hand side. We're going to repair that as a secondary pass. I just want to get the figure out of here first. And a little bit of that rock shape in there is kind of nice. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We can now deselect this, and let's back out and see how we're looking. Hold the Alt key down. Looks nice. We'll come in, we'll clean up, we'll soften up that edge in a later step. Just back out just a bit here. Now on this, I want to recreate that edge of the rock. There's a rock in behind her. I can't see it, but I know it's there. So let's make a selection along this edge of the rock, and then down here, and then we'll rebuild or fake the rock in here from stuff over there. So grab the lasso tool again, and I'll start down here. So I'm just going to follow along the edge of this rock and just work up around here. Let's just come in a little bit here, and I'll make a few little rock shapes, maybe like a little peak right there. And then up here to this rock, again, follow clear around the edge of the rock. There we go, and I'll bring it out here now. This area doesn't matter. And back to the beginning. All right, now let's fake this rock in here. Clone stamp tool again, that's all we're using. And I'll start off with just this kind of random rock stuff here. Looks pretty good. I'll just Alt key down, click in there, and let's just put in a little bit of the stuff and just do a little random kind of bits in here. And then we'll see where we're getting. Now, obviously, this left-hand edge has to be bright. So make sure that has some of the bright rock on it. And I don't want to have that seam showing. Should be a little shadow right here, so I'll grab right at that edge, and I'll just do a little shadow bit right there. Looks pretty good. Maybe get rid of that greenery. And there's more of the shadow here. That's going to be from our shadow area. A bit of lightness right up in there. That's looking real nice. And a little bit of work on this section in here. See, I'm just doing several passes on this to try to make it look as authentic as possible. Okay, that looks good. Let's deselect that. I think that is fine. Let's come in here, look for any duplications. There's a little bit of duplication on that little green spot. So I'm going to grab some foliage in here and just kind of cover up those things to get rid of that duplication happening. Everything else looks pretty good. I think we're okay on that rock. Now I want to do this side along my exact same line. So let's reselect and invert. So the area out here is now selected. We're dealing with sky again, so we need to have a much larger brush. It's already a bit too large. About like that. Again, Alt key. There's a bit of a line in here. You can kind of see the line of the clouds here and the line of the clouds right in there. I'm going to work from both sides on this. So Alt key, click. Let's pull that line over. Come in about halfway, come to this side. Pull that line in until they meet. You may have to do it a couple of times. So I'm trying to pull straight across, matching that alignment in there. of the clouds. Now down here it's pretty solid, so we can just come in and just grab a little bit of this and just paint in. And now we can finish off the top of the figure. This should go fairly quickly. And again, just working through. Looks okay. I'm going to pull this line in there just a little bit. And same thing up here, kind of match the lines of the clouds. There we go. A little too far that time. There it is, easy to fix. And continuing on, again, pulling from both sides. Makes things as consistent as we can. Just try to visualize where the clouds are and match the cloud positions. And then I guess there's like a little thin line right along there, a little edge of the cloud. Just pull that edge of the cloud through. And then pull from this side. And just a few little spots left. And I think that looks pretty good. I think that figure is now gone. Let's deselect, zoom out. Okay, she's gone, she's gone. We've fixed the top edge here, we've fixed that edge. All we have left to do now is to check our edges in here. Our first edge was right along this rock. It's a little sharp. So we can go back here to our blur tool. Make sure you're working on a small brush size and just blur the edge just a little bit. Look outside of where your selection was and try to match that same level. Let's check our rocks. That all looks good. Notice in here though it's real soft here and then it's sharp up along our edge. So we need to use the blur tool again. Just kind of running along the edge of that rock until we match the level of blur that we see down here. Don't go too far, it'll get too blurry and you'll have to back up. So just a little bit in there, just softening up that edge. And that helps to blend it in with the original photography. That looks nice. All right, let's go ahead, zoom out. And there we go. There it is. We've removed those two people and made a much more interesting picture with just the one person looking off into the distance here. Let's just enlarge this now. Pull this out like that. Zoom in a couple of spots. And there we go. That's how to remove people out of a picture if you're using just the clone stamp tool. I admit we also used the blur tool. So clone stamp tool and the blur tool for a little bit of softening up. But there it is, removing people out of a picture. Thank you for watching this special Photoshop photography project video. Don't forget to subscribe so that you will get first notice of new project videos in the future. Just click on this link right here where it says subscribe here. You can get all 12 project videos in this series along with 26 special videos demonstrating the tools and techniques that I used in these projects by clicking on this link right down here. And then thank you again for watching this training video.